Does Jesus have other brothers and sisters? Yes. Did Mary have other biological children? No. The only place in the Bible that indicates that Mary had other offspring is in the 12th chapter of Revelation, verse 17, assuming that we understand Mary to be the woman clothed with the sun, which reads, "Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring." However, the rest of that verse reads, "On those who keep the commandments of God and bear testimony to Jesus." Therefore, it's quite clear that the offspring of the woman in this verse are Christians rather than siblings of Jesus. Mark chapter 6, verse 3 is one of the primary verses for the support of the theory that Mary had other children. And in fact, several people are named in this verse. This verse reads, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Let's dig a little deeper and see if we can find out more about this to see if the Catholic Church's teaching that Mary was a perpetual virgin actually stands up to evidence. The first thing to point out is that Jesus, in this verse, is referred to as the son of Mary, as opposed to a son of Mary or one of the sons of Mary, or something else. This by itself may or may not be significant, but let's explore a little further. A similar passage to Mark chapter 6, verse 3 is Matthew chapter 12, verse 46, which reads, "While he was still speaking to the people, behold, his mother and his brothers stood outside asking to speak to him." Now, some translations, the RSV, ESV, and the New Jerusalem Bible, do not have this verse and add the verse in Matthew chapter 12, verse 47, which reads, "Someone told him, 'Your mother and your brothers are standing outside asking to speak to you.'" Jesus does not acknowledge them as such, though, but rather clarifies who his mother and his brothers are in verses 48 through 50, when he says, "But he replied to the man who told him, 'Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?' And stretching out his hand toward his disciples, he said, 'Here are my mother and brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.'" This can also be found in Luke chapter 8, verses 19 through 21, and Mark chapter 3, verses 31 through 35. As we have already observed, nowhere in the Bible do we hear anyone ever called sons or daughters of Mary. Next, we see that two of those mentioned in Mark 6, verse 3, James and Joseph, are later referred to as sons of a different Mary. Mark and Matthew's Gospels, which both mention these as brothers of Jesus, later clarify this. Mark in chapter 15, verse 40, and Matthew in chapter 26, verse 56. Another thing to consider is that the word brothers or brethren, which in the Greek is adelphoi, has a broader meaning than blood brother. Ancient Hebrew had no word for cousin, and therefore the word brother in the Old Testament could refer to a number of different relatives who were still kin or extended family. Some examples of this are in Genesis 13, verse 8, Deuteronomy 23, verse 7, 2 Kings 10, verses 13 and 14. Also, when we read in the New Testament, the word brothers or brethren takes on an even broader scope. For example, Romans 8, verse 29, Romans 12, verse 1, Colossians 1, verse 2, Hebrews 2, verse 11, and James 1, verse 2. Oftentimes, the writers are referring to the fellow believers of Christ, all those in the family as brothers, as opposed to siblings. Finally, for the purposes of this video, one powerful piece of evidence for the fact that Mary, the mother of Jesus, had no other biological children would have to be when Mary, while standing at the foot of the cross of Jesus, was entrusted into the care of the Apostle John. Now, if Mary had other children or grandchildren, they would have had a cultural, moral, and religious responsibility care for her because she was a widow. Regardless of whether these children believed that Jesus was who he said he was, they would have still been under obligation to care for their mother. Jesus entrusted her care to John because there were no other children to care for their mother. St. Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 5 verses 3 through 8, in particular verses 3 and 4 and 8, is very clear regarding this obligation when he says, "Honor widows who are real widows. If a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn their religious duty to their own family and make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his own family, he has disowned the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Now, Jesus would never have directly caused his siblings to disown the faith and be worse than a believer. There is much additional evidence that sheds more light on the Catholic Church's claim of the perpetual virginity of Mary. But the information that's been provided in this video alone should at least be enough to give serious thought and consideration to the position of the Catholic Church, which has remained the same since Christ founded it, and holds that Mary had no other biological children and that Jesus had no other biological siblings. So I ask the question again, does Jesus have brothers and sisters? And the answer is yes, us. Thanks for watching, and may God bless us all.